Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Ave Maria Press Professional Development Webinar Series. Our goal in this series is to provide parish staff and volunteers and diocesan ministers the formation, training, and tools they need to create vibrant Catholic parishes and growing ministries. In today's webinar, Roy Petitfils will share his expertise regarding how we can help teens navigate through stress in their lives and discover more of God's peace. My name is Erin Pierce. There we go. I am the Parish and Curriculum Marketing Specialist at Ave Maria Press. Before we begin our webinar, we'd like to recognize our webinar partners, the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association of Catholic Family Life Ministers, the National Association for Lay Ministry, and the National Federation of Priest Councils. Everyone in the audience is muted today, but you are able to ask questions. Questions may be sent to our presenter using the questions section of the GoToWebinar panel, which you can see displayed here. I will read as many of those questions as possible at the end of the presentation today. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to that recording will be sent to you later this week via email. With that, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to our presenter. Roy Petitfils is a Catholic author, speaker, and psychotherapist in private practice. Petitfils has more than 25 years of experience ministering to youth and young adults in parishes, dioceses, and schools. He has spoken to youth and adults in more than 75 dioceses in the U.S. and Canada, and has given keynote addresses at numerous national and regional conferences, including the USCCB Convocation of Catholic Leaders, NCCYM, and NCYC. Petitfils also spoke at TEDx in 2016 and is host of the popular Today's Teenager podcast. Roy has written several books. His most recent is Helping Teens with Stress, Anxiety, and Depression, a field guide for Catholic parents, pastors, and youth leaders, published by Ave Maria Press. Roy, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful.
I'm excited.
Great. Well, we are too, and I just am going to make you the presenter here, and
All
you
right.
can take over, and then I'll be back when you are all done.
All right. So show my screen. Excellent.
Yes.
All right. Excellent. All right, guys. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm so glad to be with you. Let me go back there. So in today's webinar, we're going to talk about helping teens lean into stress. And before we get going, this is really just my proof to all of you that I once upon a time did have hair. That was our tradition when it was my birthday. I got to eat the whole cake. It still is a tradition in our family. My last name is pronounced Petitfils. Thank you, Erin, for pronouncing that correctly. And it means grandson, by the way, en français. These are my peeps down here in South Louisiana. My wife, Mindy. Oh, I forgot I don't have their names. My wife, Mindy, obviously. My oldest, Max, with who is to the right, and then my youngest, Benjamin. A little about me. I was a seminarian for about 5 years. I studied both here in the U.S. and in Rome. I was a teacher, a campus minister, and an administrator at a Catholic high school and an elementary and middle school. Campus minister, school counselor. I went back and got my master's in counseling in 2000 and was a school counselor for a little while, but I've been in private practice for the last 13 years. And I also do a good bit of speaking and consulting. So going to throw a lot out at you today. And it might feel like trying to drink water out of a fire hydrant a little bit, but that's okay. The PowerPoint slides will be available to you if you want those. I'm happy to make those available as a download on my website. You can go ahead and get that, and then just come on back to it whenever you need. So, adolescent growth. Before we kind of get into the nuts and bolts of the stress, I think it's just important as a reminder to all of us, even as I'm making the PowerPoint. I know that a lot of you guys There's like 75 of you, almost 80 of you now on, and your combined experience and individual experience is immense. So I don't want to feel like I'm telling you stuff that you already know, but this stuff's a good reminder. A lot of folks assume that we grow in a linear fashion. We start at A and then we go ahead and move on up to B. But that's not how we grow. That's especially not how adolescents and young people grow. They tend to grow in more of a cycle. And when you're on the way up, it feels great, right? But when you're circling back around, it feels like everything has gone back to square one, and you're really struggling. And adolescents go through these cycles about once every 2 to 3 years. Now, this is what the cycle looks like in close up, right? And it is the Paschal mystery, Christ's suffering, death, and resurrection. And adolescents go through this cycle about once every 2 to 3 years, and they're feeling good, like I'm on top of it, like I got things going, I got life by the hair, much to my chagrin, and I've got it, right? And then things begin to fall apart, like life changes, life throws you some curveballs you haven't been able to expect before. You get broken up with. But about every 2 to 3 years, adolescents will go through this, and that disintegration time, this is important, because that's generally when they come to us. That's generally a time when they're experiencing a great amount of stress. Not always. A lot of times teens are experiencing lots of stress today, but it can really get sticky when they are in pretty much really, it's like a caterpillar shedding their, shedding their skin and turning into a butterfly, that disintegration process and then reintegration. And we're all an expert on the Paschal mystery when it comes to Christ's Paschal mystery, right? His suffering, death, and resurrection. Yet it's a lot more difficult to see in our own lives and in the lives of people who we care about. But that is the cycle. So just a little bit about the young brain, that around trauma specifically, because a lot of the stress that we're seeing in young people today, that you're seeing in the parishes or wherever you work with young people on the front lines, is stress that is general stress, and there's plenty of stressors. We're going to get into it, but when the emotions are really intense and the kid is maybe having a panic attack or melting down in your office, a lot of times a trauma in their life got triggered, and trauma affects the brain. The primary way is that initially is that it impairs language. So language both reveals our experience and shapes our experience. So when we can name it, then we feel like we can tame it. And so when you've got a young person who's melting down with you or really, really stressed, that prefrontal cortex gets hampered and the amygdala, the emotional seat of the brain, lights up. And so they're very emotional, but they cannot generate alternatives, and they get very myopic, like the horses that are going to be clearing out Bourbon Street, New Orleans next week for Mardi Gras. Like they have these blinders on. And so that's important. So it activates and triggers the fight, flight, freeze mechanism, which again produces a whole lot of chemicals in their body. It narrows their focus and it inhibits them from seeing alternatives. And create maladaptive neural pathways. Basically, what it does is it continues to reinforce for the adolescent, when this trigger happens, this is how one is supposed to react. And our work with them helps to create space in between the stimulus and then their either reaction, and hopefully we can help them to create a response. But that's important trauma. I know there's a lot being talked about right now in terms of trauma informed pastoral care. These are some of the main principles within that. So when we're talking about young people being stressed out, let's look at the cultural landscape. Now, a lot of these things that we're going to talk about here, these dynamics that are going to come up here, first of all, don't be disheartened by these. It's amazing how folks will be like, oh, wow, that really just kind of, oh, that really is disheartening. It's discouraging to see the statistics. Well, the truth is that the statistics were true before you knew about them, assuming that's today, and they'll be probably somewhat true tomorrow. So the statistics aren't what's giving you, making you discouraged. It's being informed and bringing it into your awareness. A lot of this stuff won't surprise you, but this is the cultural landscape, and this acts like a B-roll that's going on underneath young people. And let me just kind of face the camera here, just say a quick word about that. In terms of a B-roll, what I want you to think of these, let's pretend that every adolescent, and I should have done better with this and had a slide, has a tank. Let's just say it is a 50-gallon tank, right? And stress, life events, negative, both positive can lower it, negative events fill the tank up. When the tank begins to overflow is when we see a kid melting down. It's when they need help, obviously from someone like you, or usually when it's gushing over, they might need help from a psychotherapist like me. Understand that these cultural things, family makeup, and these things that we're going to talk about add to the tank. So before any incident happens in the life of a young people, there can be some family dynamics and cultural dynamics that has raised the bottom of their tank to halfway. And so therefore, it won't take as much stress to send them over the line. I hope that makes sense, because as you look at these, you might think, well, Roy, young people don't come in and talk about the economy. They don't come in and talk about the politicians, but they're thinking about it. They're thinking about it. So some statistics: 34% of young people in our care are raised by single parents. 46% of Black American youth are raised by single parents. 66% of Hispanic American youth are raised by single parents. And the anecdotal research that I have done in my travels on First Nation and Native American lands and reservations is that they believe that it's even higher, a higher percentage than 66, into the 70s for First Nations. So that's a stress factor. It's stressful on the parent, and it's also stressful on the young person. Another stressor, 2.4 million grandparents are raising 4.5 million children. You've no doubt seen it. You know, as I do parent presentations, and I'm headed to Lake Charles tonight to do one for parents, I will see about 2 to 5% of that audience, and it's a growing makeup, will be grandparents who are the primary caregivers for their children. Technology, we all know about this, but the average family spends less than 2 hours a day face-to-face interacting with one another, and more than 9 hours a day on screens. And that leaves a lot of families experiencing, see, if you look at this family, they're all on different screens, but they're all next to one another, right? And so it gives the feeling of intimacy. This is what's happening. This happens in my house too. It gives the feeling of closeness. We feel like we should be connected because we're all in the same room. And previously, when we've been in the same room, we felt connected. But if we're on our devices, we're really not with the people around us, or we're with them in a very, very shallow way. The average couple, less than 10 minutes a day of uninterrupted communication, while the average dad will spend less than 7 minutes a day talking to his kids. And as I said, we got a lot of families who are together alone. You certainly see it. This is a unicorn. You know, dad goes off to work for 50 years to get the gold watch. Mom stays at home. 2.147 children come home to chocolate chip Nestle Toll House cookies, hot out of the oven, milk in a big tall glass that was delivered in a glass jar by the milkman wearing a white coat, who shows up with a little white hat, looks like a milk pilot. This doesn't really kind of exist anymore. It's a bit of a unicorn. I'm not saying it should be that way, but I am saying that it is that way. The divorce rate continues to hover around 45%. And of families who experience divorce, 67% of those families are in form what's called a blended family. And that is a stressor for many of these young people. Not all. For some young people, being in a blended family is not stressful, but for a lot of them, as one kid told me not that long ago, he said, you know, I didn't get a vote in who got put in the blender, Mr. P. My dad got the vote, and I didn't get a vote. And now I've got to pretend to like people who I'm not even really blood relatives to. So about 400,000 young people are in foster care. 2.5 million young people in America are adopted. And again, for a lot of these kids, and most of these kids know that they're in a better situation, but a lot of them, as they become more aware and as they grow up, do begin to wrestle with the fact that it's not an ideal situation for them. And maybe for some of them it is. It is a risk factor though, and all of these things increase stress. Now, anxiety, stress can lead to anxiety. So by the numbers, in 2006, stress had caused in young people enough to anxiety so that we were diagnosing 1 out of 10 young people with anxiety disorders. That's in America, 12 to 17 years old. In 2016, we were up to 1 in 5. And that's a lot. Anxiety is now the most commonly diagnosed health condition, not mental health condition, but health condition. And anxiety, now you can get anxiety genetically. A lot of anxiety is normal, and we'll talk about that later on in the webinar today. But stress and undealt with stress can definitely lead to clinical anxiety. Anxiety is that stressful feeling that can never go away. And certainly there's different types of anxiety. But anxiety untreated, stress untreated, can also turn into depression. And we've got 1 in 8 teens who suffer from major depressive disorder while they are in high school, and only 1 in 5 of them get help. And so today we're going to talk about how can we actually help these young people. Speaking of stress, very commonly 1 in 4 young people self-injure in order to feel better. And a lot of these kids that I work with experience anxiety and stress, and it just gives them, it's enough to release that when they cut, it activates a part of the brain that cannot differentiate between physical and emotional pain. And so the brain sends out these naturally opiates, pain suppressing opiates to numb the physical pain, but it also numbs the emotional pain as well. And it can become very addictive, very compulsive. More than 70% of young people are sleep deprived. I'm sure you guys are seeing that in the work you do. Eating disorders, about 1 in 5, 1 in 4 teen girls, growing number of teen boys. So why are they so stressed out today? That's kind of a very simple snapshot of the mental health picture of the young people who are in our care. Why are these young people whom God is calling us to accompany and walk with more stressed out today than they were before? And let me go ahead and address the argument that, or at least a question that I'm often posed with is, Roy, are kids more stressed out today, or is it just that we know more about it and we've got all this psychological language? Now, that's a great question, but there have been some meta-analyses and studies that are done, and we do believe that young people just today, by all measures, are more stressed out. And we can look at it and think that we were more resilient to those stressors, but we would not be as resilient to some of the stressors that they are experiencing today. Most of us would get our butts kicked if we went back to high school. It's rough. It's not easy. So some stressors. And again, think B-roll, remember the B-roll, political climate. No, young people probably aren't going into your office complaining about MAGA hats or complaining about the liberals or whatever, but it's there. It's the tension. It's background on the news, the uncivil climate for discourse that exists in our country today is a stressor. They know about it. Terror and violence. This one was notable to me because they played the bullets from the Mandalay Bay shooting over and over and over again as like a backdrop to the news. I just had a young person going, I just keep hearing the sound of those bullets over and over again because their parents, like a lot of folks, have the news, which I like to call bad news, running on in the background. Undefined success is causing a ton of stress, especially in older teens and in achievement-oriented teens. A lot of young people, and this is where we have a pivotal, uniquely pivotal and crucial role for those of us who are ministers, and we get the privilege of accompanying these young people, is that we can help them understand and assess what their current definition of success is. And I will tell you that it is a definition of success that's driven completely by achievement. So much of the panic attacks, so much of the anxiety that I see around older teens is, I didn't do well in school, or I just don't care about school. And both kids, you have the overachiever and the kid who's completely apathetic and doesn't care, but both are worried about being successful in the future. And they're only looking at it through one lens very often, which is accomplishment and achievement. And that is half the formula, right? And as Christians, we know that true success, true lasting happiness, accomplishment and achievement is an important part. That's an important part. Sometimes I see people who try to overly spiritualize little kids and try to make young people way more humble than they should be, and like overly spiritualize it. But that ego has to be formed. The kid's got to grow up, and the self has to actually get formed, and that has to happen through achievement. Now, while that's happening, And as they kind of get into later adolescence, especially, we constantly always want to bring them back to what do you want to give back, right? And so lifestyle does that. You guys do that in parishes, service learning opportunities, helping people out. The family can do that. Lots of settings to do that, but help them understand that making all the money and getting the good grades, getting into a good school, getting the right SAT scores, getting the right job, making all the money will not make you happy. I've had billionaires sit on my couch who are an inch away from taking their life. Money and achievement, happiness does not make. Now, achievement within whatever you feel God has called you to, with contribution, giving back, that's success. So when young people freak out about their future, it's only in terms of the achievement arena, and we can help them see that we have opportunities to help them see that they can be successful by contributing and giving back and serving other people. Genetics is a factor. Almost 200,000 young people a day miss school because of bullying. This is one that I talk to a lot of parents about, and this is important for you as well, that if we believe that a failure is crippling to young people, if that's my belief, that failure cripples young people, we're going to have a very hard time helping young people lean into stress, and parents. And that's why we see so much stress avoidance today. We see young people avoiding stressful situations, even good stressful situations, and we'll get into that in a second. But we've got parents, we've got lots of adults, not just parents, who really don't want to see kids fail. Happened this morning. My wife and I normally bring the boys to school, but she was with me today, and she was headed back home, had plenty of time. My son forgot his book sack. We're at school dropping him off, and oh my gosh, I forgot my book sack. And our words to him were, well, good luck. We could have easily gone home and gotten his book sack, but what does he learn? Is he ever going to remember? Right? There's lots of things we learn through failure, taking responsibility for our actions. There's lots of things we learn through struggle. We live in an incredibly affluent society today. Not all of us are, but a lot of young people are. And so we can prevent obstacles, whether we're ministers or parents, we can prevent obstacles that young people once had to go through and learn about themselves and learn the hard way that they have within them what they need in order to succeed. They've got the inner resources, which could be curiosity, asking questions, looking for help, generating alternatives, brainstorming, right? Now, I know you're not going to necessarily do that with them, but understand that failing is a good thing. Being a failure is how one identifies themselves after experiencing a loss. But that's only because we haven't embraced the opportunity to learn from the failure. Okay, moving on. Less resilient, we already talked about that. More than 50% of young people in 3 separate studies I've read reported that they experience their romantic relationships as being unhealthy, and the vast majority of them around social media. It was my boyfriend or girlfriend wants my password to all my social media accounts. You know, what feels like intimacy at 16, we would call stalking behavior and abusive behavior in our 40s, right? So that's one. We've got a lot of attachment issues, young people, parents, other adults. We're not looking at each other in the eye enough, and that gives us that secure attachment. It helps us to feel like everything's going to be okay. I'm okay, and everything's going to be okay. Less play. Man, parents and everyone take school way too seriously. And that's why another gift, I think, of so many youth ministers is that they have a playful spirit. Some of the best youth ministers I know can be, and other parish workers have this, but youth ministers, I think, in one way especially, they've got this playful spirit, and the best of them also have a real serious side, and they haven't lost touch with their inner child. But we've got a lot of parents, a lot of young people who just see play. The only time they get to play is when they're traveling 35 weekends a year on the select soccer team. And play has become a job. I mean, just go to any youth sporting event, and what used to just be fun now is so intense. You've got private coaches and tutors and lessons in the stand. It's just crazy. Kids don't play. I go to check my kid out of school when he's in third grade, just to spend a day with him because I've been on the road, and the secretary looks at me like I grew another head out of my neck, and she's like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "Well, we're going to play. I don't know, we're going to go to the movies." "Mr. Roy, you checking him out of school?" And I'm like, "Well, Miss Sue, he's in the third grade. Like, I don't think we're missing quantum physics here." But that's stressful. We need to play. Adults need to play. Like, I have to admit it. Like, I've got to put that in my schedule, time to just have fun and play. They're busy, 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 busy. Social media, fear of missing out. These are huge. I'm not going to get too deep into social media, but we know that these things and the experiences, interactions, and whatnot that it creates for young people, very stressful. Take a water break here real quick. Yes, that's what happened to the dinosaurs. All right, so stress, anxiety, and depression. What exactly is stress? And how do I help young people lean into it? So stress, pressure, tension, this is Wikipedia. You can tell I just screenshotted this right out of Wikipedia. Someone will sue me for that, but oh well, here we go. Stress, this is according to Petitfils, stress, the feeling you get when you feel unable to ascertain, understand, or meet expectations. All three words there are important. Ascertain, understand, ascertain meaning like I'm aware that this person or this group, this responsibility that I committed to has expectations for me. Understand meaning I understand what those expectations are. And finally, meet them. I feel like I can do it. If at any point in that train, if any one of those boxcars comes apart, then that will create stress. I mean, you can ascertain it and understand it, but if you don't feel like you can meet them, then you will experience stress. Now, stress is normal. Stress is a normal part of life, and anxiety even can be a normal part of life. It's normal for people who have undergone trauma to be experiencing anxiety for days, sometimes even weeks after they've experienced a significant life event or a significant change or a stressor, right? But a lot of stressors can be good, and young people are surrounded by a lot of good stressors. And what they lack is oftentimes parents and other adults in their lives. And I'm not suggesting that this is the role for the parish minister, but what I am suggesting is that a lot of times young people can have too many good stressors on their plate. But when they come to us, they're usually in the moment and it's hot and they need us to help fix the situation. And so quitting is often not the right thing to do, but it can be depending upon the situation. And that's something that you could explore. We'll talk about that in a second. But usually it's okay, in a month from now, once we kind of get through this crisis, let's talk about how much you put on your plate and maybe why you're putting so much on your plate. And certainly there are bad stressors. People talking smack about you on social media, people invading your privacy, tons of bad stresses, and you can imagine what they are. But some of the good stressors, exercise, best natural anti-anxiety, antidepressant on the planet, and yet most of us don't do it. And we're leading more and more sedentary lives. Young people, thank God for PE, because they live a pretty sedentary life in the school setting. They, get out and sometimes they'll do sports. Fasting is a good stress. Depriving your body of food if you don't have an eating disorder for a certain period of time. We got a whole season coming up where we're going to do that. That is good. It doesn't feel good necessarily in the moment, but it's good spiritually, it's good emotionally, it's good for the body. Taking on healthy responsibility. So young people, do you think it's appropriate for my son who's a gaming addict to get a job this summer? Absolutely, it's appropriate. He needs that. He needs a good stressor. Academic stress, healthy guilt, which is I love you. I love you. What you did was certainly hurtful and has some consequences, but I love you, and that doesn't mean you're a bad person. That's guilt, as opposed to shame on the other side, which is not. And healthy competition, which we're struggling to find in a lot of places these days. But bad stressors, overt pressures from parent, like you've got to you've got to do this or else. Those things can be a bad stress. They can be good too. Perfectionism, that's unilaterally an unhealthy stressor. Chronic stress, which happens when teens play a lot of video games, by the way. Parents don't let them game during the week, and then they binge game on the weekends. They stay in fight flight mode for days at a time, even because they're experiencing trauma, shame, and certainly unhealthy competition. So kids, they'll use the word stress, but a lot of times they'll use these synonyms: pressure, worried, nervous, overloaded, anxious, overwhelmed. What is anxiety? Anxiety is taking ambiguous data and drawing from it the worst possible conclusions. So understand, remember back to the trauma slide. So when the alternatives are narrowed, right? When the alternatives are narrowed, it may not be ambiguous data, but it's a small amount of data. I don't have all the data. So when I'm stressed and I'm under a lot of stress, my ability to be able to see all the alternatives and all the options really gets myopic. And so it can either be short-sighted or ambiguous. A lot of stressors and anxiety for young people today comes from just simple interpersonal communication. They've become very proficient in interpreting what's here on screens and very inefficient and non-proficient at being able to discern and ascertain and correctly read and interpret nonverbal social skills, nonverbal communication. And so ambiguous data, they'll draw the worst conclusions. So a girl or a guy could be looking at you like this, or maybe even looking past you, and you're like, oh my gosh, he hates me. And he could just have a bad case of, I don't know, indigestion, right? But they hate me and they're going to spread the school against me. That's anxiety. So how do we challenge stress avoidance? So for the last 15, 20 minutes, let's just talk specifically about what's our role in that and why is it important. Here's why it's so important. Because we are often, as parish ministers, we often have the opportunity to both parents and to young people to be advisors to them. People look to us, not always and not everyone and not all the time and certainly not in every situation, but a lot of times they're advisors, and we can either do that when folks come to us, and a lot of times, depending upon what your ministry is, you have the opportunity to be able to speak and put forth content to folks. So that's important. And what we're seeing is more and more young people who are avoiding stress. They get overcommitted, or not overcommitted. They just have a few different stressors and they are avoiding it. And what happens is, especially, I see this a lot with parents who either because they're working too much and don't have the time, or for whatever reason, they don't have the time, they don't have the energy in order to help this young person follow through and do it. It's a classic example. Well, I'll get to that in a second. So why, what's wrong with avoidance, Roy? What's wrong with my daughter? What's wrong with my youth group member, my teen, checking out of school at 1 o'clock so that because she's not prepared for the test at 1:30 and then coming back tomorrow and taking the makeup test? Well, there's a few things wrong with that. One is that when she gets home, her stress levels and hormonal levels have increased, and many studies have showed it doubles. So we double load the stress on the back end, like you've got to take the test, right? And so I would imagine some folks in certain examples can, and I know tons of people who do it. I've got lots of clients who do it, right? But it just teaches them and reinforces for them that when I experience something stressful, whether it's good stress or whether it's bad stress, that I can avoid it and I've got to do it later. Well, that becomes a pattern in a lot of young folks, and the stress just builds, it builds, it builds, and it builds. Momentary relief reinforces that. We talked about that earlier, that it's like a bridge in the brain. Meaning that I can avoid. That's going to be the number one option that the brain will present. When you're stressed, avoid it, get out of it. Now, we see the brain does this in social anxiety disorder, it does it in general anxiety, but we are seeing young people do that who don't have clinical levels of anxiety, but who are just avoiding just normal stressors. A lot of school avoidance we're seeing across the board. You've got to be seeing it. A lot of young people who at times just don't want to come to youth group because they might have to have an awkward conversation with someone, or they may not want to come to religious ed, or they can't deal with this teacher. In any way, we see lots and lots of young people, and especially their parents, lawnmower parents, right, mowing the obstacles out of their kids' way. And this also leads to phobias. Young people can definitely develop phobias. So what do we do? How do we challenge it? Well, the 5 steps, and you can simplify it as we go on, but I'll talk about each of these just a second. One is to show respect. So when the kid's coming to you all stressed out and they've got something going on, and they could be emotional, it depends, we can have a face of, oh, what's going on, right? And then when we hear about it, we might, well, that's nothing. God, You're always so dramatic, right? So we don't want to condescend. We want to normalize it. We'll get into that in a second. And I'm going to go into each of these. Sorry about that. So show respect. What does that mean? So watch out for drama. A lot of times when we pick up on drama, a lot of times our natural instinct can be to roll our eyes and go, okay, especially if the kid has a history of drama. Um, we want to be careful to not be condescending and not be patronizing for a bunch of reasons, not the least of which it's charitable to do so, but as well as when we show respect from the get-go with people, with young people, initially, their resistance goes down. And that's what we want. We want their resistance to go down so that we can help to influence them. We don't want them to not want to do what it is. We may be able to help them discern what to do. So we want to check and adjust our attitude. We want to be glad that the young person, we can't do that all the time. I know, because I know you're busy. Avoid being condescending and patronizing. So just be respectful. Normalize the behavior. And what would that sound like, normalizing? A lot of times kids, adults, people think, oh, I must be crazy. I'm the only one in the world who's feeling like this, because they're not having a lot of heavy, deep, and real conversations necessarily amongst teens. And so for you to be able to go, yeah, lots of teens go through this from time to time, whatever this is, and however often it might be. But normalizing, it's okay for you to feel what you're feeling right now. I've worked with lots of teens who have experienced something similar, just a few ways that you can normalize it. And again, that lowers the resistance. So you've been respectful to me as the teen. Now you've normalized it. I don't feel like as much of a freak. And each step we go down the line, we begin to soften that amygdala, right? Which is just pumping emotion. It's pumping emotion. That stress is just fight, flight. The hormones are just cranking up. And when we normalize, when we show respect, the resistance lowers. You could actually plug in a heart rate monitor to the young person. We could do an MRI scan of the brain and just watch it actually change as you go through these steps. Listening changes people. Offer empathy. So, and the way you would offer empathy would first be to ask about their experience. And it's really empathic when we ask about another person's experience, because we don't assume that we know the experience. And that's another level of respect, especially for those of you like me who are veterans, and we've just kind of seen it all kind of come around the bend. We like to box things in, and it just makes things more efficient. We know exactly what the kid needs to do, so it can be difficult for us to sit there and be patient when we think we know the answer and go, what's it like for you to know that you're not ready for this exam but still have to take it? What's it like for you now, not knowing anyone, but still your parents pressuring you to make this retreat? What's that like for you? And then we listen to them. And then we offer a mirror. And I like this technique. So for you right now, is it kind of like? And for three reasons. So for you right now, is it kind of like, oh my goodness, I've never really made friends easily. I'm not one to make friends real quickly. And now my mom's making me go on this retreat. And there's going to be a whole bunch of people who aren't at my school. And I'm like freaking out. What if nobody likes me? Is it going to be boring? And I'm not going to make any friends. And I don't really know what that means. I'm going to feel left out. And it's just going to be a really rough weekend. And that scares the heck out of me. Is it kind of like that? And the young person can go, yeah, it's exactly like that. Awesome. So, but you may have to do that a few times in order to get them to say that. And you don't need to go all out, but those of you who want, I like this formula because remember, as I said earlier, language reveals experience, but it also shapes experience. So the words that we use are helping to shape the experience of young people. Now, I don't say that to make you paranoid, like, oh God, now I got to watch every single syllable that comes out of my mouth. Absolutely not. This is just a guide. Make it your own. I like it, especially for working with sensitive issues, because I want to do three things. So for you right now, this isn't true necessarily for everyone, but it's true for you right now. Right now means it's in the moment, means it implies that there's a possibility of it being temporary. And is it kind of like puts it forth tentatively, which is very respectful. That's very elegant, and it doesn't assume that you know what's going on inside that person. Roy, why is that so important? Nobody wants someone else to be the expert on their own life. I want to be the expert on my life. You want to be the expert on your life. when I sit there and help you, I mean, if you're really suffering and I'm able to give you something and get you out of it, then yeah, I appreciate that. But in most situations, I love it, and most people like it when we put it forth tentatively. And then we can keep doing that over again. It's kind of like, awesome, okay. And then validate it, right? This is another key place where the brain changes. It's amazing when we validate people. It's almost like it's a serotonin dump in the brain. Like you'll actually watch them take a breath. It makes perfect sense to me, Jillian, considering everything that's on your plate, how busy you are, that you would be freaking out about this test. It makes perfect sense to me that you would have forgot about it and didn't have a chance to study. It makes perfect sense to me. Knowing, it makes perfect sense to me that you're freaking out about going on this retreat, especially knowing that you've really struggled in the past to make friends, and that doesn't come easily to you like it does for some kids. It makes perfect sense to me that you'd be freaking out without going on, knowing anyone going on the retreat. And then offer alternatives. But watch this. This first one's important. I struggled with the title on this slide because um, what I would do first is, number one, I'm curious. The last one, I don't have these in order. I'm so sorry. Let's go to the last one. I'm sure this isn't the first time you've encountered this. How have you successfully handled this before? What else have you tried in order to push through it? I'm curious, what other alternatives have you considered? What consequences might it have if you do choose to avoid this stressor instead of leaning into it? Feel, felt, found. I love it. You can definitely use this. Oh, I can tell, it seems to me that you're really feeling like you're freaked out right now and stressed about this test. Many other young people your age have felt the same way. What we have found is that when we avoid the stressor, it actually makes things worse. And so, is there any way, and that it comes back with a vengeance, is there any way that you could see yourself pushing through? What benefits might it have for you if you push through? Even if you don't want to do what we discuss, at least brainstorm a few other options. Let's brainstorm a few other options so that you can feel like you have a choice here. And so that's exactly what I would do in terms of walk. I can't make them lean into stress, but I can advise them. And there's a very sophisticated way to do that. And so that's it. Just wanted to tell you guys a little bit about the podcast, Today's Teenager podcast. That's out there, a lot of content there, which is free, and we're about to do questions. If you want to reach out to me, Roy at today'steenager.com. And then I know Aaron had showed you the book that is coming out next Friday. Very excited about it.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Okay. Let me get back here to changing the presenter. Okay. Let's see, here we go. All right. Thank you so much, Roy.
Yep, absolutely.
I think so many of these things that you have talked about, we really can apply to so many of our relationships in life.
Yeah, right.
Right? I mean, coworkers, spouses, parents, family members, just some really great, wise stuff here.
Thanks.
For those of you who have not yet had a chance to ask a question, please feel free to do so now in the questions pane of the GoToWebinar. We've got a couple questions here already, so I'll just start with these.
I can't see them.
Caitlin asked, can you see them?
No, I can't.
No, okay, all right. Caitlin asked, how do you define trauma? That trauma can sometimes be used in a different way.
Yeah, great question, Caitlin. And trauma, the way I like, is in the eye of the beholder, correct? So something that might not be traumatic for you could be traumatic for someone else, and vice versa, right? So trauma is a state. It's a physical event. It's an emotional event. It's a psychological event that actually is revealed through what happens in the brain, what happens physiologically, and trauma would be an event that has got more intensity than our defense mechanisms will allow. And so what happens is that we go through it, and when experiencing a trauma, we don't get to fully go through it because our defense mechanism, shock, and denial, all of those things kind of come up because we wouldn't be able to handle the full impact of it. And so it kind of a little bit kind of gets shoved down deep. But, a trauma for a kid could be parental divorce, even though they deny that. It could be watching mom and dad get in a fight. It could be mom fighting with dad and I'm going to take the kid and go to a hotel room. That can be a trauma for a kid. It could be as simple as a kid who told me was traumatized. I only made a 35 on my ACT out of 36, right? Perfect score is 36, and I won't be able to get into MIT. And I know people who would cut off both of their arms in order to get a 33 on the ACT, much less. So that was traumatic for that kid. And so we just want to go in and find out. If they usually can't talk in detail about the experience, that usually that might have some trauma around there, depending upon how old they were. That's a great question.
Okay, yes. Let's see. Lisa wants to know, you mentioned that not letting teens game during the week and only on weekends is not healthy. Can you
Oh,
elaborate?
let me rewind that. I didn't say that was not, and if I did, I'm so sorry, Lisa. Great. Thank you for pointing that out. I appreciate that before I get crucified. In fact, I think not gaming during the week can be a great thing. What we want to be careful of is that we don't allow them to binge on weekends. So I see a lot of parents who prohibit gaming during the week, and then it's just the wild, wild west on Saturday and Sunday. They can game 14, 16, 18 hours a day, and that's not healthy, right? No, kids should probably not game for more than 2 hours at a time and then take a 15 to 20-minute break so that their adrenal system can rest, because a lot of the games, especially for boys, can elevate the fight flight mechanism.
Okay, great, great. Thanks for clarifying that. Linda asks, how do you feel about using medication to help teens get their stress and anxiety under control?
Yeah, well, we don't medicate. If the teen is experiencing acute amounts of stress, or if it's situational stress, we don't. We might not medicate that, but anxiety. If we've got a pattern of a kid, and usually we have, but like people who would manage episodically when stress itself gets medicated, it's oftentimes done with benzodiazepines or like a Xanax or Valium or something like that, which is it's designed as a temporary measure to immediately lower the stress. So sometimes kids who, or even adults who might have episodic stress, if they've lost someone, sometimes teen depression can show up. And so they might not put a teen on something long acting unless they can find a pattern of anxiety. But a lot of teens who are significantly stressed really have significant anxiety, and they're just calling it stress. So I love anxiety. I love medication for it from the qualified mental health and medical professionals, for sure.
I know you talk a lot in your book about like the toolbox, right?
Yeah,
And there's so many different things that you might need depending upon the situation. And so having all of those different tools to help
absolutely.
the kid or right. Okay. Let's see. Mickey asks, is there a nature aspect to anxiety or is it all
Uh-huh.
nurture?
No, in fact, great question. Is that Nikki who asked it?
Mickey
Thanks,
with an
Nikki.
M.
Great question. I didn't skip over the slide, but I went through that slide very quickly. And the word that was on it was genetics. But no, you are absolutely correct. We now know within the last few years, we've got some research that strongly suggests that a lot of anxiety can have a genetic component to it. What does that mean? Means that, and I'm pretty sure mine does, that we've got generations of it in my family, and I see it in my kids, is that remember that tank we talked about? So if I have a genetic inclination, then that means that at some point, a stressful life event could kick in my anxiety disorder. Stress doesn't come by nature, but an inclination to anxiety, or meaning an inclination to where I can just be much more easily stressed out. It just doesn't take that much stimuli to make me stressed out. Both of those can have genetic components. And so it is very, very real. And depending on how significant, those are times when medication can really be helpful.
Mhm. Okay, great. This is a question from Brian. He says, I'm having more instances of teens who have such stress in doing an overnight. So I'm thinking maybe
Yeah,
this is a like a retreat type thing.
yeah.
Um, any strategies on convincing them or their parents to overcome that stress?
Yeah, I think I would walk parents through the uh, the the stress avoidance paradigm. Now, again, walk them through the. Oh, I'd like you to see this PowerPoint. No, but what I'm saying is that just to say, look, I love feel felt found. I get it. I get it. If it were my kid, I would feel like the best thing to do is not to put them through that. I wouldn't want them to suffer. I get it. And there have been lots of parents and young people who have felt the same way. But what we found is that for the vast majority of young people, when they do push through and come, that one, they have a great time. I can't guarantee that, absolutely. They could make new friends. But what I can guarantee is that if they come, that and make it through to to the next day, their self-esteem and their confidence will go up and their anxiety will lower a little bit. If they avoid the retreat, the anxiety is only going to get a little bit worse. So where do you draw the line at avoidance? Now, if a kid's seeing a counselor, then I would suggest to the parent, well, check with the counselor. And if the counselor says no, but if a kid just doesn't want to come, I would do everything I could. Now, you can't make them go, but I would strongly encourage them to go.
Hmm. And maybe have some sort of plan in place if once the
Yeah,
child's there, if he realizes really not, that he's really struggling
absolutely.
to get
And,
out.
there's lots of tool. I don't want to patronize any youth ministers or catechists out there who, already have a lot of other tools in your toolbox. But I did it for 10 years, brought kids on retreats. And, there's certain kids you keep an eye on, you watch, you might, do certain things or your team, you or your team.
Hmm.
Great
Absolutely.
question.
Okay, this is a question from Vittner. Can anxiety or stress be confused as evil possession?
Wow.
That's
That's
above
so
your pay
rare.
grade, maybe.
What's that,
I
Aaron?
said that's above your pay grade, maybe.
Well, I have found I've had parents bring lots of kids in, with that who thought they were possessed and they were really just having a psychotic break and they needed to be hospitalized. If it's up to the parent, if you feel that now I love prayer does a lot of good. And so, but rarely does anxiety present as some sort of demonic possession. Um, and those terms are so nebulous. It's we could line 10 people up and we might all disagree on what exactly it means to be possessed, but we could probably all come in agreement with anxiety and stress. And so I would, Occam's razor is the principle we follow here, meaning solve the problem at the simplest solution possible. So, before we call the exorcist, let's see if we can have a dialogue with the kid or maybe bring their parents in. Let's see what we can do to help them emotionally de-escalate, and see. And then if none of that works, and then yeah, punt it to the exorcist.
Yes. Okay. Clarissa asks, in addition to building confidence, how generally can someone benefit from leaning into stress rather than avoiding stress?
Well, the confidence is huge. So that what the kid learns, and I often say it, I was like, wow, you went through it and your head didn't explode. You did not spontaneously combust. Like you have a pulse now. So it didn't kill you. And that I like to draw that parallel because even though the kid doesn't think I'm going to die, that's exactly the message the brain is sending to the endocrine system, which is I'm going to die. And so it produces that response. So that is huge. The second thing is that it's a snowball. The avoidance pathway is a snowball pathway that they will never get out of. They will continue to be behind on things. They will, it's once you avoid one thing, it's easier to avoid the next thing. Like especially if they're commitments, if these things fall in line with what we should make. Now, I'm talking about things that young people have chosen to do or have agreed to do with their parents. I'm not talking about the new thing, like, hey, I want you to go and do this. You should really go do skydiving. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about having them do things that are part of their everyday normal life. And it also teaches them that I have the capacity to do things that I don't feel like doing. And I see a lot of young people who come through our ministry events who do not have that capacity. They're very spiritual, but have very little backbone and very little work ethic. You've got a kid who's got who have made 100 retreats, have been to 100 Steubenvilles, but yet like they've never really done anything hard that they don't want to do, and they don't know that they can make themselves do it. And religion will fall into that category when religion and those events stop being fun. And so, that's a type of discipleship that often young adult ministers, have to encounter, because it stopped being fun. The romance is worn off. Now we got to get about the work of discipleship. But there's lots and lots of things that, in addition to confidence, true self-esteem, self-efficacy, which is a belief that I can actually do it. Like, now I know how. That's not just confidence, is that I know how to do it. Yeah. All right.
Yeah. Roy, can you tell us your email again that you put up the slide? What is it?
Roy, R-O-Y, at today'steenager.com.
Okay, Roy at today'steenager.com.
Yeah.
Okay, when you were talking about the strategy of offering the mirror, right? Yeah. So,
Thank you, Eileen Ponder, for that image.
Good. I'll tell her. As you're saying, so for you, it might feel like this or that. What would you say to a parent who might be worried about saying those things because maybe I'm going to implant new ideas or new things that might cause stress or anxiety or depression for my child?
Yeah, and you don't want to go too far-fetched, but normally the experience that a young person, to most people, like, you can go try this out on the person on the train. We don't listen to one another anymore. In general, we don't listen to one another anymore. You sit next to someone and you begin telling that person what you're hearing them say. That's where they are in that moment. Like, they're just looking to be validated. They're pulling for you, hoping for you to get it right. So the suggestive aspect of, while I'm validating, I'm making them feel that way. No, absolutely not. It doesn't suggest to them. It doesn't plant the idea in their head. What the teen gets from that is that, man, this adult is really trying to understand. Wow, this is great. And they may be a little nervous because they're not used to experiencing that. They're not used to someone else paying that much attention. And then what's also happening in the mind of the teen and your husband or your wife or your friend is that people don't do this. When's the shoe going to drop? They're paying close. So they're just waiting for you to stop listening to them at that point, because and it's powerful. It's life transforming. But wouldn't worry about the suggestive stuff.
No. Okay. I'm getting a lot of people asking about your PowerPoint. Are you going to download that onto your...
Sure. Would it be easier to get it to you and you could email it to the whole list?
Yes,
or the
you
link?
can do that.
It won't be it'll just be a link from a Google Drive.
Absolutely. We can include that in the email that will go out tomorrow.
Perfect.
For sure. Okay, wonderful. All right. Well, this has been really wonderful.
Thank you guys so much.
Such great things to reflect on and apply to our ministries and to our lives as parents.
Yes.
So I have read the book from cover to cover, and I highly, highly recommend it. I really so much do. So we have a special offer here for you, using the promo code webinar0226, which is for today's date, 20% off. So the book is $15.95. That'll bring it down to $12.76, and this will expire on the 8th. So you can go ahead and pre-order now, and we'll send it out to you as soon as it comes in. So before we sign off, we'd like to thank our partners once again: the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association of Catholic Family Life Ministers, the National Association for Lay Ministry, and the National Federation of Priest Councils. If you're not familiar with these organizations, you can check them out at their websites displayed here on the screen. This webinar, as well as all of our past webinars, will appear on YouTube, Vimeo, and the Ave Maria Press website at avemariapress.com/webinars-videos. And please mark your calendars for next week's webinar on Tuesday, March 5th, same time. Jason Kidd, the Director of Marriage and Family Life Office for the Archdiocese of Portland, will speak on how to revitalize your parish through building small faith communities. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you so much, Roy.
Thank you.
And we will see you all. Have a great afternoon. Bye.